Active Directory, recon attacks, post-exploitation. I was going to have more pictures in this, but I stayed down at the Galt House, and they're barbarians and don't have free Wi-Fi. So I've been using Iodine to get to my server and get my email and stuff like that. And I'm not going to download pictures over DNS over IP. So you're just going to have to live with not very many pictures in it. And like hell, I'm going to pay for Wi-Fi in a hotel. Real quick background about me. Been messing around with computers since 1985. My day job is I'm a partner in a small IT services firm. Windows, Linux, sysadmin, jack of all trades, routers, switches, servers, whatnot. Got coding experience that I don't really talk about here. Much more x86 assembler than anybody in my line of work should have. As a side effect of things I was interested in when I was a teenager, and that's about all I'll say about that. My side job for the last couple of years now, a buddy of mine is a founder in an IT consulting firm whose name you would know, but I'm not going to say. And they started pulling me in as a subcontractor in some jobs. So I've got to do some pen tests, some web app testing, architecture reviews, red team, blue team exercises, and really kind of rekindled my interest in security, because I'd gotten away from security for a while, just doing IT work, and so kind of getting back to it. So I thought, hey, I want to go to DerbyCon. I'll try to submit a talk, and it worked out. We're going to talk first about recon against Active Directory. And I guess I'll briefly say the impetus of this talk is, you're a pen tester, you've got some familiarity with Active Directory, but it's just something that's in the environment. It's not something that you have a lot of familiarity with what you can get out of it. So I do expect some familiarity with AD in the Windows security model here, but there's no like O-Day in this or anything like that either. This is just, hey, you're a pen tester, you want to know a little more about what you can get out of AD and how you can leverage it and what you can do with it. So AD's default security posture for unprivileged users, come on in. AD's really lax with permissions right out of the box. Basically, unprivileged users can read all kinds of stuff out of the directory, and that's just how it comes out of the box. Directory integrated applications may break if you try to lock this down. We're talking third-party software, we're talking Microsoft software. I've heard horror stories of SharePoint breaking because people have played around with permissions in AD. And I don't know about current versions of SharePoint, I guess I am talking a little earlier. But there's this assumption on the part of app developers that you've left AD alone, that you're not playing around with the permissions. I like this quote at the bottom. This is from March 2011 from a Microsoft Most Valued Professional, somebody that they've, picked as, you're an expert on the product. And he's, basically saying, well, it's not a security issue if users can see other issues, and just accept it, because millions of people use it that way. Well, yeah, but, millions of people have XYZ vulnerability before it's patched, too. That doesn't make it okay. But, yeah, the attitude in the community is just leave it alone, don't play with it. And so you don't find a lot of resources out there about how to really lock it down. And basically, if you do, you're kind of on your own. If it breaks, you get to keep the pieces. So ways that I've seen AD get locked down, the most common technique that I've seen out there in production is list object mode. Basically what this is doing is changing the search functionality or the enumeration functionality in AD from its default mode, and what you're doing is you're setting a value in the schema. There's this field DS heuristic, or in the configuration, there's this field DS heuristics, sort of like a bit mask, but it's not. It's like a string of ones and zeros, except you can put like a 2 in a place. So it's not a bit mask. But basically what it does is it alters the behavior so that on a given folder, or OU, container, I say folder, but some container object, if you grant, if you deny users list contents of that object, in the default mode, they can't see any of the contents of the object because you've denied them list contents. But when you tick this mode over to list object mode, then you can apply explicit permissions to objects that you want to be visible, and they become visible. Basically what it is, it's an optimization in the code. When you turn this on, you're taking back an optimization, and you're making the ACLs have to be evaluated for each object and each OU at the time that the user enumerates them. So you're throwing away an efficiency hack to get this granular permission at the object level. And I've seen this used a couple times. I've actually seen this in multi-tenant Active Directory environments and like service provider type environments. I've never seen this used in a corporate network. Not to say it's not out there, I've just never seen it. Limiting ACL visibility. I've seen this a couple times. By default, your authenticated users can view the ACLs on most everything. So, as a pen tester, I want to go out there and look at the ACLs and see what I have rights to and don't have rights to. We'll talk later about getting around that a little bit. But so yeah, you can deny authenticated users, read permission at the top of a domain or at the top of an NC, and explicitly granted permissions at containers and objects below the top override the inherited permission, so your administrators can still see the ACLs, authorized users can see the ACLs, but just Joe, authenticated user, he's not going to be able to troll through and see the ACLs. Or you as the pen tester, when you go to dump all the ACLs out of AD, you're not going to get them. Confidential attributes, this is something that got added in Windows 2003 Service Pack 1. And it's sort of obscure. I've never seen it used in corporate IT. Microsoft uses it for the BitLocker keys. So what it is a way to control the visibility of individual attributes on AD objects. An example use case that Microsoft has in their docs is for like social security numbers. You want to add SSNs to your AD schema, but you don't want those to be visible to just Joe anybody. So you use this confidential attributes functionality, and you can then assign permissions to who's allowed to see those attributes in those objects. It can't be applied to stock objects in the AD, so basically you've got to add something to the schema, and like BitLocker is an add-on to the stock schema in order to use this for anything. There's also no GUI tools to manipulate these permissions. It all has to be done from the command line. So I think that's probably part of why I don't really see this happening in corporate environments, is because there's no friendly, easy GUI way to do it. You want to gain access to a DC. Well, you need to find a DC first. You want to gain access to AD, you need to find a DC first. You can do it a couple different ways. The way that a client does it is a client goes out and looks up known DNS records, SRV resource records. So you can go out there and look for the same SRV records that a client would look for, and that's going to get you a list of DCs. Now, if you want to be more nuanced about it, you can use known DNS records to actually find the sites, find a DC in your site, and that matters if you're going to pull down a large directory, for example, and you don't want to pull it over like the slow WAN link over a satellite to Guam. You really would like to get the one that's on the server right across the hall. But another real simple, cheap thing you can do is just look at the NS records for the domain. Easily 9 times out of 10, all the domain name servers for a given domain are domain controllers. I see very few people using like non-DC DNS servers because it adds complexity. I mean, you can use bind secondaries or whatever DNS server you want as long as it supports SRV resource records as a secondary to AD, but most people just use Microsoft. So look at the NS records. Odds are probably good that they're all DCs. Note about global catalog servers, they have a known URL or a known SRV resource record as well, known DNS name. They're an LDAP server running on port 3268. They contain a subset of all the attributes of all the objects and all the domains of the forest. Why I bring up global catalog here, simply if you've got a domain that it's a child of whatever forest you're working in, but all the DCs are behind like some kind of perimeter device, so you can't query them directly, find the global catalog. At least you're going to get something about that domain out of there, and it's a pretty decent quantity of information. So as I said, there's an LDAP server running on all the DCs. If you query the root DSE anonymously, so just bind to it with an LDAP client, you get a little bit of information, but it's really not very useful. You get like the domain's name, the name of all the naming context within the forest, LDAP versions. It's really basic stuff. It's not very helpful. But oh, you get a valid credential, even just an unprivileged user account, you can go to town. You can read all kinds of stuff. If anybody went to Zach's talk yesterday, he mentioned that the LDAP server will take NTLM relay. It'll do just about all the read operations, I think, work fine with NTLM relay. There are write operations that fail if you're attempting to perform them through an NTLM relay because it wants Kerberos authentication to do those things. So like the one I can think of, we'll talk later about creating arbitrary DNS records because unprivileged users can do that. And yeah, if you're NTLM relaying to that, it's going to say no, you don't have permission to do that. You need to be coming in through Kerberos to be able to do that. But yeah, NTLM relay, a lot of fun. I like to dump the AD out to a text file. I do that for a couple reasons. The main reason I do it, to be honest, is I don't want to impact the client's production environment. I don't want to be running searches on their DCs where potentially I could be hammering the CPU on a DC and have them come back and say, rules of engagement said no DOS and you're DOSing my domain controller. What gives? So I use this tool from Joe Richards. He's a sysadmin guy on the ActiveDIR mailing list. Joe's a really cool dude. He will answer your questions, has written some really nice software. His AD Find tool, it does all kinds of neat stuff as far as when you point it at a DC and say, hey, dump that out, you can resolve the SIDs to human readable names. It'll do LDAP controls in the search filters. It'll decode magic numbers that are used throughout the directory. He's got, various magic numbers that he's gone out and figured out what they are, and it'll just decode them. It's not open source, but that's just, that's Joe's prerogative, but it is a really nice tool. So I'll use that to dump out the database portion, the LDAP portion of the directory. Just to note, beware of distributed link tracking objects. I've run into this a couple times. This is an old feature for feature from Windows 2000, and they turned it off in 2003 stock, and it's been gone ever since. But I've had a couple times where I've been on domains that are really old, and I'm tooling along, dumping it. I notice it's taking a really long time, a really, really long time. I pop open Wireshark, I look, and I'm sucking down a bunch of these link track OMT entry objects. So you go, you stop it, you go do a search, and you figure out there's like 15,000 of these things in a container in the directory. You don't need these things. So just filter them out in your LDAP search string. If you query the root of the domain and it has a when created date of like 2005, that's fine, don't worry about this. But if it's got a when created date that makes it look like it may have come from the Windows 2000 timeframe, you probably want to filter these out because odds are good they left them on. If you ever want to, as an aside, read a really good story about how Microsoft had to clean up their DCs when they filled up with these crap objects, because they deployed the feature internally, realized after a couple years, oh shit, this is terrible, our DCs with their 36 gigabyte SCSI drives are almost filling up their drives with these link tracking objects. We better get rid of these things. Oh shit, we can't because of disk space on the DC. So it's kind of a fun story. You can Google for that. You'll find that it's a fun little story to read. It's on Microsoft's website. They say the company in the story is Trey Research. It's Microsoft. So don't ask how I know. I just know. Along with dumping the database portion of the directory, dump the file system portion too. So when I say dump the AD, dump the entire AD. Grab the sysfile share off a DC. As long as you've got an unprivileged account, it's world readable by default, and you're probably going to be able to read the whole thing because a lot of admins don't realize it's world readable and they don't apply permissions anywhere in it. Some do. A few people do know that they can put permissions on group policy objects and scripts, but some people don't. It should be synchronized between all the DCs, so just grab one. If it's not synchronized, the sysadmin has a problem. It's not your problem. Well, it is if you need something that's in another DC, but it's not your problem to fix. So this contains group policy objects and probably most of the scripts they're using. A lot of admins don't realize they can point script outside of the sysfall. Sometimes they do, and we'll see later that they don't understand when they do that the script needs to be secure. So we'll talk about that too. So now that you've got this thing, what kind of stuff do you want to look for in it? I will say I've got some Perl tools that I've written. Yeah, I'm an old Perl guy. Sorry, no nice Python or anything like that. Excuse me. But I've written some Perl tools that I may or may not be able to put up. I need to talk to the people that I wrote them for to see if they're okay with me putting them out there. But I'm parsing these dumps from AD Find to look for things. And if I can, if you're interested, email me later. I'm going to touch base with them. And if I can put them up, I will. They're not pretty scripts by any stretch of the imagination, but they do some of these things in an automated fashion. The first thing that I go out and look for, if I want privilege escalations, I'm going to look for non-stock ACLs in the directory. I want to find places where someone's gone out, some well-meaning admin who doesn't exactly know how the product works, has gone out, tried to delegate control, and they've screwed up, and they've given me a way to privilege escalate. So that's where, this is especially where the script comes in, because it can find those non-stock ACLs pretty easily. Because there are a lot of non-inherited ACLs on objects in the directory. That's stock that they're going to be there. Looking for targets, I'm going to look for cross-ref objects and trusted domain objects. These are going to be child domains, application partitions within the directory, and then domains that I trust or that I'm trusting. So this may expand my target scope, because I may find things here that that they're in scope of my rules of engagement, but the customer didn't bother to tell me they were there, or maybe they don't even know they're there. We've got this trust relationship to this NT4 domain over here in the basement that keeps the HVAC running, and we didn't know it was there. I'm going to look at groups and group memberships. Half of this is just I want to get a lay of the land of the organization. I want to see who the domain admins are, who the enterprise admins are. Are these groups full of people? Am I dealing with someone who's really stupid and has like everybody and their brother in these groups? I'm also going to look for groups with helpful sounding names, things like help desk, password reset, because I'm going to see, maybe I can get into one of those groups. Maybe I can get an unprivileged user account that's actually kind of privileged because it's a member of one of those groups, and I can use that as a privilege escalation. And then I'm going to look for groups that have their SIDs named in group policy. If a group is being used in group policy for something, it's probably special, and so I want to know about it and what's it being used for. I want to reverse engineer that and figure that out. Obviously, I look for the well-known RIDs. The RID 500 administrator account, I love it when people rename that because I love to tell them what the name of it is, because it seems like, well, how did you know that? I looked for -500. I actually had one particular engagement where the RID 500 administrator account, I read the name to them, they said, well, that's one of the vice presidents. I said, what the hell? What do you mean? No, that's one of the vice presidents. I'm like, he's using this account? Yeah. Oh, God. Somebody renamed the RID 500 administrator account to, like, Joe the vice president. So you want to get more well-known RIDs and SIDs. There's an article there that's got them, but they're out there, so look for them. I'm going to look for password anomalies. I'm going to use LDAP search filters to find these. If you're not familiar, that OID there is a control that lets you do bitwise filters. So I'm going to look for disabled user accounts, passwords that will expire, passwords that aren't changeable, and then the last one, passwords that have never been changed since the account's been created. Because if I can figure out if there's some kind of default password that they're setting on accounts, I may suddenly have a whole slew of accounts there that are available to me. I'm going to get some network topology details. Site subnets and site links give me details about the network topology, WAN topology, where the subnets are. DHCP server authorization records, those also give me network topology details, so I'm going to go out and grab those. DNS. You probably can't AXFR their DNS servers, but if you've got an unprivileged account, you can just query everything out of LDAP. So you're going to find, obviously all of the machine accounts and stuff like that, but also records that have been created manually, you're going to be able to pull out. The DNS records, the actual DNS record is a binary blob, so I recommend using LDAP to run a script with like dig or something to actually have the DNS server resolve that information for you, because otherwise you have to dig into this binary blob that's, I don't believe publicly, it might be publicly documented, but it would be in like the antitrust disclosure docs on Microsoft's site or something like that. So I just use LDAP, then use dig. And then fine-grained password policy is out there. This is a new Windows 2008 thing, and you might find that there's a part of the directory that has different password requirements or different account lockout requirements based on these objects. So you do recon, you get a bunch of stuff together from the database, then you go look at group policy. So this is the files that you pull down. Restricted group policy, am I putting groups into groups on local machines that might give me privilege escalation? Are members of the help desk local admins on a whole bunch of machines? User rights assignment, am I assigning a group like act as part of the operating system rights on a bunch of my computers? That would be a nice thing to get into that group then. Domain security policy, what's the auditing policy, what's the account lockout, what's the password policy? You're going to get that from the GPOs to the root of the domain. And then domain controller security policy. There are programs that want nasty changes made to like user rights assignments, and people load them on the DCs. So you find that like there's a backup exec service account that has act as operating system on a DC. Cool. So the password backup. Hey, I'm in. So look for those kind of things. Group policy preferences, not a whole lot to say about this. It's basically you can do everything that scripts can do, only it's got a shiny, nice GUI that Microsoft bought, and XML files that are reasonably easy to parse, just visually. So you got stuff together. Okay, let's attack now. An unprivileged account, like I said, may actually have some privilege. So don't assume just because you're not a domain admin that you can't do something with it, that someone hasn't given your account more permission by delegating control. Account lockout only covers logons. So now, there are third-party products, I will quickly say, that they'll watch the audit log, and if they see an account doing something crazy, they'll lock it out. The stock product won't do that. Once you're logged on, you can bang on the directory all you want. You can as many access attempts as you want that fail, and it will lock your account out. So if ACLs are hidden, and you want to know, well, do I have permission to do X, Y, Z? Just do it. And as long as you're okay that you're leaving an audit trail, you can just try things, and you're not going to get locked out. Software installation policy and group policy, I've seen this before where the shares where software is being installed aren't secure. So this software installation runs a system on the machine that it applies to. So just alter the software to install something that you want and then get it to install on a machine. Startup and shutdown scripts. These run as system on the clients as well. They don't have to be located inside the GPO. If the admin leaves them in the GPO, the permissions are decent. But if they point them out somewhere else, some other share, and the permissions aren't good, hey, perfect, alter that script, your system and all the machines that it runs on. You want to join a computer to the domain because you want to be a member of domain computers? Well, no problem. You got an unprivileged account. You can join up to 10 computers to the domain by default. A lot of people don't realize you can do that. So fire up a VM, join it to the domain with your unprivileged account that you got, and now you've got a member of domain computers that you've got system on. Hey, better, see if you can get a domain admin to log in on it. See, it's a server, tick on RDP, name it something really close to one of their servers, do a little social engineering. You might get cached password hashes from a domain admin on your VM that you joined to the domain. Post-exploitation. So you get system on a DC, game over. You own all of Active Directory at that point. So look for vulnerable third-party software on the DCs that you can leverage for privilege escalation. If you own a DC, technically you own the entire forest. I don't really recommend doing this attack in a pen test because it is practical, but it's right there on that line between practical and theoretical because you run the risk of damaging the client's directory. But basically what you're doing, have you ever heard someone say, domains aren't a security boundary? What they're saying is SID history is honored on the trust relationships between domains by default. So if I alter the NTDSDIT to say, yeah, I'm a member of enterprise admins according to my SID history, and then talk to the forestry domain controllers, they'll go, yeah, okay, yeah, cool, you're a trusted domain, that must be cool. So basically, if you own one domain, you do own the entire forest. You can use, I've seen a technique where you can use a Samba 4 DC to do this so that you're doing it all on your own machine. It still kind of gives me the willies to do something this hardcore to a client's network during a pen test. But if you get the sign off and you can do it, hey, it might be kind of cool. Stealing the password hashes out of AD. Basically, there are 4 ways that it has been done historically. The most common way has been code injection to LSASS. That's your FG dump, your Metasploit password hash dump, something like that. And we all know this gets caught by AV and host intrusion detection. You could also crash the box, not really a good thing. You can read the LSASS process memory. If Windows, if the structures get updated in memory in a new version of Windows, that may not work anymore. So a tool may be too old. The tool may also be detected by AV as well. Frac68 had this interesting little tool in this S4 tool that basically used a deprecated API to replicate the password hashes like an NT4 backup domain controller. Thing is, it doesn't work on Server 2008. So it's there, but it's not going to work in a lot of networks. And then lastly, you can just directly read NTDSDIT. This is the least intrusive method. You can get to it by a VSS snapshot, pull it off a backup. You can boot in DS restore mode, which you're going to need like an ILO or something to do. And you can use a forensic tool to read raw disk blocks. A friend of mine did this. He was doing an external pen test that became an internal pen test when he popped a multi-home box. And then he ended up behind their firewall mounting one of the DCs with Metasploit's forensic module as a network block device, and then just suck down the hashes through a web server that he popped. It was a lot of fun. How do you interpret the file once you've got it? Well, you could use the ESC API, the same database API the product uses. It's going to be a lot of work. I've used the libescdb/ntextract tool. You can get that. I forget who wrote that. But it works. If you're going to decrypt the hashes then out of the DIT, which I would imagine you want to, you're also going to need a system registry hive off the DC because each DC encrypts the passwords with a unique password encryption key. So basically you need to pull the system hive so you can get the sys key out there. So you've got the PEK so you can decrypt the hashes. Maintaining a foothold post-exploitation. I really don't feel like long-term maintaining a foothold is necessarily, well, it's not part of a pen test, I believe, and it's not necessarily all that easy or practical to do. Add yourself to domain admins. Restricted group policy may pop you back out of there in 5 minutes. So, if you need to maintain some foothold for some amount of time, just modify the group policy. It's just a text file. It's easy enough to modify and to put back when you're done. If you can keep system on a DC, like if you install a service that you control that runs the system, hey, you're cool then. They can take you out of domain admins. You can put yourself back. Beware that you can't persistently modify ACLs on some objects in the directory. I won't give all the details here because I'm running a little short on time, but suffice to say there's a process that's going to fix those ACLs for you, so just be aware of that. Just Google the admin SD holder if you want to know more about it. I've seen some people claiming to use tricks to hide user accounts using like Unicode characters that look like ASCII characters. Yeah, it's kind of a gimmick. I mean, somebody's going to notice that there's another, like, gee, there's 2 users named administrator in domain admins. What gives? Well, you know, one's got a Unicode R or something that, no, that's a gimmick. Stealing plain text passwords, you can load a password filter onto the DCs, 1 or more of them, and then as people change their passwords, you can exfiltrate the plain text passwords. That still works even up into Server 2008 R2. I think they left it in 2012. Can't believe they would have removed it. Very last thing here, identify the risks with respect to AD sabotage. Don't do sabotage, obviously, but just identify that there's a risk there. A malicious attacker, if they really wanted to dork up somebody's directory, just trash the schema, do a whole bunch of cruddy things to it, you know, make it so they can't update to the next version of Windows, something like that. Use some OIDs that are going to conflict with the next version of Windows. Because basically to rebuild that, you're stuck restoring a DC from backup and then rebuilding all the DCs. Check to make sure they're doing backups of AD, because if they're not, you know, they need to know that they are. So that's all my stuff. I think I probably have like 45 seconds left if anybody's got any questions. I'll put these up somewhere. That's my email there. Eventually I will get these slides up on my website somewhere and see if I can put those Perl scripts up too. Thanks.